Back in October, a group of 80 women and Rabbi Savinar and myself traveled to Poland, and it's wonderful to see some of them here this evening for 5 days, and some of us stayed for an extension in Krakow for Shabbat. And I think one of the highlights of the trip really was our time in Krakow at the JCC of Krakow, where we spent Shabbat, where we had Friday night dinner. And just the idea of having Shabbat dinner in Krakow with about, I don't know, probably 100, 120 people, Jonathan, in this space, making Kiddush, sharing words of Torah, celebrating Shabbat. I don't think that my grandmother could ever have imagined that. And it was, for many of us, it was this journey that was the ups and downs of being in Poland. And a couple days before that, after we had toured through Auschwitz, our very next stop, and this was intentional, our very next stop was the JCC, where we danced with the people in the JCC, and we made, what did we make? What is kasha? We made pierogies. We celebrated life in a place that so many of us associate with death. And there's a story being told right now in Poland, and particularly in Krakow, of Jewish life. And that life, that project is being led by Jonathan Ornstein. Jonathan Ornstein is the director of the JCC of Krakow. I feel like, Jonathan, you're part executive director, part social worker, part rabbi, part outreach facilitator. I mean, this is a facility that does it all, and in some ways is the center of Jewish life. And I would say in all ways, it is the center of Jewish life in Krakow. And Jonathan is a friend to this community. He's a friend to many of us. You've been on this bima before. I invited Jonathan tonight because, as many of us know, we've been watching this story unfold in Poland with this legislation that has made it illegal, or there was proposed legislation to make it illegal to refer to Polish death camps, which I believe many people do not refer to them as Polish death camps, but the legislation reached further than that in terms of how people can speak about the Shoah, speak about the Holocaust in Poland. And Jonathan, in many ways, you were on the front lines of this debate. You were published an op-ed in the New York Times. The president of Poland came down to the JCC of Krakow, and I think that your voice was very much heard as a leader in the community. And we're thrilled that you're here, and we're thrilled that you are going to share with us some thoughts about what's been going on in Poland, and both in the immediate past and what to expect in the future. So. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and it's wonderful to welcome you on this bima. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom. It's an honor to be back. It's an honor to be back here at PAS. I really feel, as a New Yorker, like I'm coming home. And first of all, Mazel Tov to Jamie and Mark. This is huge. So as Rabbi Neil said, I have stood here a few times before you, here, downstairs, hopefully, maybe soon, also in the new building, Mazel Tov, the beautiful new building, and talked about Jewish life in Krakow and the Jewish revival. 170 of you on 2 recent missions have visited Krakow and seen Jewish life re-emerging after the Holocaust and 50 years of communism. You've seen a brand new Hillel open for our Jewish students. You've seen Freida, our Jewish preschool, the first since World War II, open. You've not only visited us, but your community and many of the people in this beautiful sanctuary have been prime movers, making Freida and our JCC possible. And for this, I'm incredibly thankful, as is my whole community. And I'm happy to tell you that Jewish life in Krakow continues to grow and flourish. Young people are still walking in every day, having just found out that they're Jewish. growing up without knowing, and walking into a building with Holocaust survivors kibitzing on the first floor and toddlers toddling on the second floor. The miraculous rebirth of Jewish life that began after the fall of communism in 1989 and really got underway, I objectively say as the director, when the JCC opened in 2008, continues apace. And then 6 weeks ago happened. Poland passed the Holocaust Bill. The good news is things look much worse from afar than they do on the ground. It's a bit like when you watch CNN or BBC about Israel, and then you go walk around Tel Aviv. Seems a very different reality. The lesson might be not to watch TV. But what is the Holocaust Bill? What is the problem with it, and what's going on in Poland today? The Holocaust Bill states that it's a criminal act to say that the Polish nation was responsible for the Holocaust, and this is punishable by jail. This law was passed, by the way, on January 26th, which is the day before January 27th, which is International Holocaust Memorial Day, which is absolutely not the time to pass a Holocaust bill. The law states that Poland wasn't responsible as a nation. Well, what's the problem with this? Poland, as a country, didn't even exist during World War II. It was occupied by Germany. So why is this even an issue? The first problem is the definition of nation. We Jews are a nation, Am Yisrael, so the term nation is somewhat imprecise. You can be a nation without being a country, and nation is a term that lawyers certainly do not like, and it does not make any sense to use in a law like this. But why all the uproar? The law, poorly written and terribly timed, has been interpreted, or misinterpreted, to mean by some that anyone saying that Poles were complicit in the Holocaust can be jailed. In other words, the suggestion can be that a survivor who's giving testimony about his own experience, where perhaps Poles did harm to his family and collaborated with the Germans and turned them in, which happened in certain cases, could be prosecuted for telling his own life story, which is clearly ridiculous on many, many levels. And that has been how the law was received, and that's why everyone really got so upset about the law. Now, the Polish authorities have stated that that wasn't the intent, and they're talking about Poland as a nation, whatever that means. And Israel and certain Jewish organizations are calling it Holocaust denial. And there's a lot of nastiness, to be honest, and imprecise statements on all three sides: the Polish side, the Israeli side, and the Jewish world side. And this situation has stirred up many bad feelings, and some Polish public figures have felt like the good name of Poland is under attack and have made hurtful and sometimes even anti-Semitic statements, things that we haven't heard in the public sphere in Poland in a very long time, certainly in the 17 years that I've been living there. And this has affected us, we're the fourth side: Israel, Poland, the US, and we're sometimes the forgotten fourth side, the Polish Jewish community, which are the ones most affected by laws like this. And small community, but as we know, and as many of you have seen, a community has grown and has been really remarkably free from anti-Semitism in the last 27 years, since communism ended, since the country regained its independence. It's been very, very low anti-Semitism in Poland, certainly much less than almost everywhere in Europe. So we can probably agree that the Holocaust Bill seems like an incredibly stupid idea that was poorly implemented and then horribly received. So the real question is, why did they do it? Why did Poland do it? So our initial easy answer might be because they're anti-Semites. Well, we Jews need to be a little bit careful about automatically thinking things are anti-Semitic. Now, very often we're right, because there has been, and unfortunately, my optimism notwithstanding, will be anti-Semitism in the world. But sometimes we need to take a little closer look and to make sure that that's exactly what's going on. And in this case, I think it's a little more complicated than anti-Semitism. Poland has a new government in place for the last couple of years that's a right-wing populist government. And they got elected by saying that Poland, by joining the EU and opening up to the West, something that many of us living in Poland see as incredibly positive, has been losing its Polishness. And this government sees itself as the defender of Poland's good name. Now, the Polish narrative during communism, don't worry, we're not going to take too deep a dive into Polish history. The Polish narrative during communism, while they were occupied for 45, almost 50 years by the Soviet Union, was that they were victims or heroes. Right? We all know that Poles did good things during the war. Many were honored. The most Poles were honored by Yad Vashem. I think it's 6,712, something. A lot of Poles were honored by Yad Vashem. Poles did good things during the war, and Poles did bad things during the war, like every other country in Europe occupied. But that's not what they were taught during communism for 50 years. And because it wasn't in the Soviet Union's interest for Poles to have a more nuanced view, it was, you were all victims and martyrs and heroes. But since the end of communism, since 1989, Poles have been forced to confront a much more complicated narrative that, yes, they were victims at being invaded by Germany, but they were also at times guilty of horrible acts toward the Jews. And this government does not like the more complicated narrative, and it's walking back a lot of the good, healthy, at times painful progress that has been made between Poles and Jews. You know, when you have people living for 1,000 years in Poland, as Jews have been, it's an ongoing dialogue between the majority non-Jewish Poles and the Jews. Up and down, up and down, up and down. And in 1939, that really fell off a cliff. And for 50 years, Poles weren't taught about anything Jewish. And since 1989, so much good work has been done, and this dialogue has sort of been reemerged, and people have been talking to each other once again, but it hasn't been easy. But what this government is doing, and this view of history, is something we see around the world: populism. There is a trend in the world today of governments. We don't have to look very far to find populist governments in Europe and on our own continent. This is the case. We often think of history as going in a certain direction, but history in many times is like a pendulum. And just when things get very, very good, there's a reaction and things go in the other direction. And it seems in many ways, wherever you are politically, that we seem to be entering around the world a more tolerant, a less tolerant, more closed, xenophobic phase in Europe as well, and including Poland, among the government. So what's going to be? Well, the law has hurt the good relations between Israel and Poland, which, by the way, Israel has been, for years, the best friend, along with the Czech Republic, has been the best friend of, Poland has been the best friend of Israel in Europe for a while. So it's hurting those good relations, which is not in either of their interests. It's hurt relations between the U.S. and Poland. Last week, I had it was this week, I had a congressional delegation visited the JCC in Krakow, primarily to talk about the Holocaust Bill and what that means for Polish-American relations. And for me, most importantly, it's done harm to the environment in Poland for the Jewish community, which is an environment of cooperation really created by Jews and non-Jews in the last 27, 28 years since communism ended, working hand in hand to rebuild Jewish life. 2 weeks ago, as the rabbi mentioned, the president of Poland came to visit the JCC. He and his wife's name is Agata Kornhauser-Duda. Kornhauser-Duda. President Duda and his wife visited our preschool, and after he and I made some speeches, and we sat down in a room, we kicked out all the TV cameras, we closed the door, and a dozen or so community members had a very intense discussion with the president and First Lady, along with the Chief Rabbi of Poland who came down. And we told him how we feel in the current environment, that the law is the law, and that's its own issue that we generally disagree with, but this environment that's been created around the law, of things that have suddenly become more permissible to talk about, to say, hurtful statements by public figures in the state-controlled media were unacceptable, and we expect a zero-tolerance policy in Poland toward anti-Semitism. And we told this clearly and forcefully to the Polish president. He listened, and he told us that Jews have a place in Poland where we've been for 1,000 years, and I believe him. At that point, our Hillel director, Marziana, who's 25, and as a teenager herself found out that she was Jewish, grew up without knowing, as many of our young people do. She asked the president to invite his daughter, Kinga, to be a member of Hillel and the JCC, since she fulfills the age requirement. She's a law student, and she also fills out the requirement of having Jewish roots, as I alluded to by her mother's name, Kornhauser. The Kornhausers are a very distinguished, well-known, intellectual Jewish family from Krakow. And now at this point, I think we were unable to do it on Shabbat to turn off the recording equipment, but I'll tell you something that is absolutely not at all common knowledge, and that we haven't told anybody in Poland, and I'm saying it not for dramatic effect, but really it's something that we don't want to talk about very much. So obviously I shouldn't be saying it here, but I think it's relevant, and because I feel like I'm among friends, I'll tell you. 3 days later, Kinga Duda, the only child of the Polish President Duda, walked into the JCC with a filled-out membership form and joined. She told us she can't wait to visit her family in Israel, that she was mad at her mother for only having told her about a couple of years earlier. And also, which I find maybe even more interesting, she knows 10 ways to braid challah. 10 is a lot of ways to braid challah. I'm going to have to see when she comes in and does that. And it turns, on the form, it says, how did you find out about the JCC, on our standard membership form? And she wrote down, in very nice handwriting, I should mention, from the internet and from my parents, which I thought was very cute, since they'd visited a few days earlier. Jews in Poland have been there for 1,000 years. We're resilient, we're strong, we've survived wars, we've survived pogroms. The Jewish community, even although greatly, greatly diminished, survived the Holocaust. And we will continue to stay in Poland. We'll continue to work with our non-Jewish Polish partners and continue to live as you do in New York, and as we can all hope to do as good Jews, to live moral, good Jewish lives. And for those of you who haven't visited yet, I would encourage you to come see what is a modern-day miracle. And like many of you in the Park Avenue family who've been to us in Krakow, you come saying Kaddish, and you leave saying Shehechianu. Shabbat Shalom.
Jonathan, thank you. And you're 100% right about how you walk in versus how you leave this place of light and brightness. Mazel tov on your new member. That's wonderful news. And thank you for those words. And I suspect that we will see you soon. All right?
Thank you.
So there's a bike ride you should talk to Jonathan about. There's a Jewish folk festival.
Presidential daughter challah baking class.
That's right. So there's a lot going on in the Krakow Jewish community, and we'll hope to visit again soon.